Chapter 51, On the Wagon. As a member of the royal family, Prince Jing naturally knew the affection between His Majesty today and the Fan family. He was slightly out of his mind, and next to his ears he heard his staff say, "It's just that Fan Xian hurriedly entered the capital, and today he was in a restaurant." Not to mention being too showy, but also too wavy. Jing Wangshixi waved his hand and said, "Young people, some impetus is always good." He spoke in a tone that seemed to have no self-consciousness at all that he was only in his early 20s. Thinking of the affectionate smile on the face of that Fan family's youngster, the corners of the Seiji's lips spread a trace of an appreciative smile. What's more, the Fan family is currently planning that Tsubaki marriage, so it wouldn't be quite right if Fan Xian were to lay too much of a low profile. I think that after today, everyone in Kyoto will know that the Fan family has an extra beautiful and clean young master. Suddenly he snapped out of it, slapped his forehead and laughed. "When I first asked you to be a staff member, I said that I would only be allowed to help me strategize about the affair. My father is an idle prince who doesn't care about the dynasty, so I, as a son, must not be ungrateful. Come, come, come." He greeted the people on the table and started drinking. The people on the table hurriedly responded, but in their hearts, they thought, "If you are really willing to be an idle prince, then why are you so close to the Fan family, and why are you so close to the second prince?" After a while, Fan Ruoro let out a giggle as she boarded the carriage and was quiet all the way. Fan Xian asked curiously, "What's so funny?" Fan Ruoro gasped as she stroked her chest, and after calming down for a while, she said, "I thought of my brother's earlier remark again, and it's really mean and cruel." "Which sentence?" Fan Xian had felt that he had said a little too much in the restaurant today, completely violating his own low-profile principle of being a man, and felt that it was not right. "It's that sentence, one who spends his days having fun, is skinny as skin and bones, and still has to fan himself with a fan. Is this what is known as the bones of the wind?" Fan Ruoro learned his tone of voice and couldn't help but purse her lips and laugh again. Fan Xizha also giggled on the side, but realized that the other two people in the carriage didn't pay much attention to themselves and were somewhat muffled. Fan Xian laughed bitterly and said, "This kind of thing is extremely good, but it is not something that belongs exclusively to the readers. Earlier, when I saw those so-called talented people looking at the sky and tilting their necks to support their nostrils, I was upset. One by one, they eat all day and only talk about the wrong things, if they have the guts. They don't go to the imperial examinations and don't sit with that guacodifier, this kind of thing, or else they will beat it and then step on it again, just based on the shape of a pose. It really doesn't have a lot of future." Hearing these words, Fan Ruoro couldn't help but laugh out again. Her own elder brother's tone of voice was different from everyone else's in the world, and probably only she could understand the meaning of it. Just now, Prince Jing was beside him. Brother must have had some qualms about speaking. Fan Ruoro was curious to know what her brother really thought about these readers. "There are no scruples, just a much gentler tone." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "I don't resist places like greenhouses, and I don't think that talented people can't go to greenhouses. But I have always felt that a whoremonger is a whoremonger, and if you go to a greenhouse and still act like a talented person, it's just as hypocritical as the bitch who sets up a house of cards." Fan Ruoro, slightly shy, said, "Brother speak also too rude some." In her mind, her own elder brother was truly a scholar, so wouldn't he be scolding himself? Fan Xian laughed. "There are no outsiders anyway." He suddenly looked at his sister with a straight face and said, "Remember, girl, don't marry a genius even if you marry someone else." Ruo finally could no longer maintain her calm expression and spat, "What nonsense! What is that one called his own way doing nowadays?" Fan Xizha snatched at the side and answered, "A student of the Imperial College, from a poor background, but is said to be a student of Zhang Wenxiang, the university scholar of the Jixian Hall, has always had some small talent, and did a few verses of poetry. Everyone estimates that next year's imperial exams, it will be at least the 3rd grade." Fan Xian frowned and said to his sister, "This person seems to be loyal, but in fact, he is very tolerant and capable of acting. I don't like this kind of character. You should be more careful in the future. Try not to come and go." Fan Ruo nodded without hesitation. In her mind, Fan Xian was an elder brother and a teacher, and even more so, the person she could rely on the most. Fan Xian was thinking about that black-faced scholar named Izongwei. Since the other party was already a famous scholar in Kyoto, if he wanted to join a high family, he should have many options. If it wasn't because of his sister's relationship, then there was no need for him to jump out earlier, wanting to leave a good impression on himself. He smiled with the corners of his lips slightly curled up, to be able to discover his own identity in such a short period of time, to discover his own position in Ruo's heart, this so-called talented person. It seems that he really isn't simple. Turning his head to catch sight of Fan Xizha, who was lying on the car window looking out, Fan Xian's heart felt slightly cooler as he said to Ruo, "Later, you and he will go back to the residence first. I will stroll around Kyoto for a while longer." Fan Xizha withdrew his head from the window of the car, his face a little bewildered. Fan Xian looked at his face, thinking that when he was 12 years old, he began to face assassination, and thinking that the other party was actually only a 12-year-old child, and was dragged into these very sinister things, he couldn't help but sigh and say, "You're only so young." Alas, I really don't know what to say. Fan Xizha somewhat fearfully ducked behind his sister. He had always been bold, but for some reason, every time he saw the gentle smile on Fan Xian's face, he was a little afraid. "What are you talking about?" Fan Xian had thought that this conflict at the restaurant was deliberately drawn out by this little guy in front of him in order to expose himself in an extremely bad light in front of Prince Jing. It was important to realize that the opinions of the Jing King's family would always play a role in the future succession of the Fan family's family business because he was the one who chose the restaurant, and he was the one who stirred things up. But at this moment, looking at the blank look on Fan Xizha's face, he couldn't help but somewhat doubt his own judgment. Could it be that all of this at the restaurant today was just a random accident? As the carriage slowly moved forward, Fan Xian knew that at least 2 of the 6 guards who came out with his siblings today were Lu's men, so he said nothing more. Fan Ruo stayed calm, head bowed and speechless, her heart slightly annoyed as she thought about these things at home. When the carriage reached the street in front of the Fan residence, Ruo led her brother back to the residence, while Fan Xian continued his day trip to Kyoto. Originally, Fan Ruo wanted to go with him, but he thought about what he would be doing later, so he had to smile and decline, and then looked at Fan Xizha twice, and opened his mouth to urge not to tell the truth about the dream of the Red Mansion, but he just didn't know if the other party would listen to him. Fuji Zijing sat in the carriage and looked at his little master. I don't know when, but Fuji Zijing had decided that he would definitely have a very promising future if he followed this 16-year-old young master, perhaps because the spring in Tanyuzu really does tend to give rise to beautiful imaginations. Perhaps it was because he had been infected by this young man in front of him along the way, or perhaps it was because some sort of an agreement had been reached between the 2 people. Fan Xian thought for a moment, propped up his jaw and asked, "I asked Father for you to come here, so I guess you won't have much of a chance to make a name for yourself in a short period of time, so don't blame me." Fuji Zijing smiled and respectfully replied, "Young master is not an ordinary person. Following young master will naturally be beneficial." Fan Xian laughed, "And where am I unusual? Earlier in the restaurant, I wasn't just spouting around like a normal ignorant teenager." Fuji Zijing speculated on the meaning of his words and carefully replied, "Young master, I understand what you're guessing, and I don't think this matter has anything to do with young master." The carriage had stopped, and the fresh breeze outside entered the curtains soundlessly, refreshing the mind. Fan Xian glanced at Fuji Zijing and said gently, "I also hope that this matter has nothing to do with him."